Hello everyone, Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt with the Institute of Lutheran Theology. The title of our lecture is called Late Middle Platonism, Lecture 2. And it follows Late Middle Platonism, Lecture 1. So if you haven't seen that, you're going to want to view that as soon as possible. We've got three thinkers we're going to talk about today. Plutarch, Numenius, and Albinus. And so this is one of the few philosophy lectures for theology that ever had these three thinkers as these to talk about. Plutarch of Chaeronea, 46 to 122 AD, seems to have advocated a dualism where reason is in strife with unreason. Well, that makes sense, right? I can buy that. The logos is both transcendent and immanent. Well, that makes sense too, right? It's transcendent as the thoughts in the mind of God, right? And it's immanent as Osiris routinely torn asunder by typhoon and reassembled by Isis. There you go. So we're into some things here that are a different kind of a thing than we would have found Plato maybe talking about or the earlier academy. But anyway, for our purposes, this is a transcendent dimension, an immanent dimension. So the question, what is the ontological status of the demiurge? Well, the demiurge in some ways seems to be transcendent, and in other ways, maybe a denizen in the realm of becoming, somehow not transcendent or immanent, but is it a transcendent being or is it a top story of the world? And how does then the demiurge connect to the world's soul? All of these are big questions. Here we have the logos as both transcendent and immanent. And if you kind of abstract away from the Osiris and the Isis story, this is, a philosophically interesting question, I think. Creation happens in time. The one and the dyad are good and evil, in a way not unlike Zoroastrianism. You're saying, well, what about Zoroastrianism? How many times do I put on the whiteboard here, one and dyad? Well, of course, Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda and Angri Manu, are twin principles, and they're locked in sort of a cosmic pugilist match, boxing match, right? And this happens in the souls of people within Zoroastrianism. And of course, then there's a question of the degree to which Zoroastrianism is an ethical dualism or not. We won't get into that. Traditionally, it's been taken to give rise to Manichaeanism, this idea that there's an evil and a good principle. So in Plutarch here, we have the one and dyad functioning a bit like this. The one is good, the dyad is evil. He advocated the immortality of the soul. However, he denied transmigrations of souls, and like many of the other guys, held to free will. He respects the element of puzzle, the aporia in Plato, right? Puzzlement, while focusing on the Timaeus. And this is certainly, I think, in keeping with Plato. Plato was always open-ended, it seems. It's a literal interpretation, as we mentioned before. The world comes from the interplay of the Creator God and the dyad. God accounts for order, dyad disorder, order good, disorder bad. Reason good, order, unreason bad, disorder. See? The soul becomes rational as God imparts reason to it. And evil is accounted for because there is a primordial disorder the non-rational world soul. And this primordial disorder of the non-rational world soul is never completely eradicated, and so that's why we have this bad stuff here in life. The human soul is derivative from the world soul. It has both rational and irrational elements. So I want you all the time to keep thinking about the world soul. You've got to think that the cosmos itself has a kind of soul, an oversoul, right? But that's not the demiurge. You've got to keep thinking that. The human soul is derivative from the world soul, and the world soul has rational and irrational elements just as the human soul does. The human soul's concern for his or her body is irrational, and its concern for the intellect accounts for its rationality. So I'm irrational when I think about my body, but rational when I square numbers. Yes. So there are levels of ethical life, and he distinguishes, this is an interesting thing he does, he distinguishes the civil practical life from theoretical life. So he can talk about sort of different spheres of goodness and badness, different ways in which things can be good and bad. His emphasis on the metaphysical and the psychological questions pervaded the subsequent tradition. Emphasis on the Timaeus, literal interpretation. And the notion of the world soul as created by partaking in reason imparted by the demiurge. This is picked up in Numius. So we've got the demiurge giving reason to the world soul. And this is creation, of course. His influence, his got a dualism going here between the one and the dyad, reason and non-reason. This is picked up by Numius and Atticus. His view of providence, which allows freedom within an overall system, which from the point of God would look a little bit more like it's necessary, but it is consistent with human freedom. This influenced Platonists and Christians alike, Christian theology. And he desired to take into account all of Plato's work. So that was important for the tradition. Our next thinker is Numenius of Apamea. Numenius of Apamea, a 2nd century thinker. He influenced Plotinus. Now, I could say Plotinus, but everyone says Plotinus, so I'm going to say Plotinus, who is the arch-Neoplatonic thinker. Numenius tried to construct a system of intelligible principles. Matter accounts for disorder and evil, while the intelligible principles account for order and goodness. Again, we got a dualism going on. He has 3 principles of reality which presage Plotinus's trinity of the one, the nous, and the world soul. The one is linked to Plato's form of the good, right? So this is going to be the form of good. The one there. Then we have the nous that comes out of that. That's mapped to the demiurge, right? And then the soul, of course, this is mapped to the world soul. So we've got the one, we've got nous, and we've got soul here in Numenius. Influenced by Plato, of course, and the Pythagoreans. The good is, or the one, is eternal and at rest. The nous, or demiurge, translates the intellectual forms to the temporal order again. And the world soul, or soul here, contacts matter, and it divides itself into both a rational and irrational part. Now, I've always liked this part of Numenius. This is like, what's your favorite thought by Numenius, right? Well, my favorite thought is that human beings enter the world by the Tropic of Cancer, right? They have a rational and irrational part like the world soul and are transmigrated and long to ascend to the divine realm. And if I entered the world by the Tropic of Cancer, I would want to transmigrate and ascend to the divine realm too. The rational and irrational parts of humans are in conflict, and salvation happens when the soul leaves materiality. Our last major thinker here is Albinus. That can't be his age, 149, 157 in this misprint there. He's an interpreter of Plato. We'll get it right in the slide. A pupil of Gaius and a teacher of Galen. Of course, Galen was the famous doctor. The Handbook of Platonism was traditionally attributed to him, but it may be by Aquinas. He holds to the triad of good, universal intellect, there we go, nous again, and world soul. And the good emanates out of the other two from its mind when he thinks his own thoughts. Okay, the good emanates out of the other two from its mind when he thinks his own thoughts. I'm going to let that one go because I don't want to go down that road. He is the first, maybe, to, well, not the first, but he is one who would employ apophatic language when talking of that which is transcendent. And of course, you'll remember that Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, writing in the 6th century in his famous book, Mystical Theology and on Divine Names, talks about the non-speakability of God, because to say anything about God would be to say what God is not, because God is beyond all predication. So Albinus seems to be working in this direction. Souls are created through the hypostatization of thoughts in the good, and souls must conquer unreason with themselves. Taught that human beings have a battle between reason and unreason. You'll see some recurring notions here. At the same time, we have what's called the Platonic underworld, Hermeticism. This is a batch of philosophies named after an ancient sage. Divine reason descends upon darkness, calling the universe into being. And people in this tradition sometimes advocate deification, which is the becoming as God or like God. Deification is to become God, really. But then, of course, the question is, what does that mean? Gnosticism, when you take your courses here at the Institute of Lutheran Theology in early Christian theology, you will come across the various Gnostic systems. And these Gnostics seem to be in conversation with the currents of thoughts within Middle Platonism. Bielfeldt says that the first parent emanates nous, which emanates logos, then phronesis, then Sophia, and dynamis. So in Bielfeldt, you have this idea of the generation from above. This begets this, this begets this, this begets this, this begets this. Valentinus, all things are generated from a primal duality. Also we have happening the so-called Chaldean oracles. Here the Father is residing with power, and the Father is that from which the intellect or nous proceeds. Hecate separates the intellectual and material realms. The world soul comes from Hecate, and from the world soul emanates nature. Fate comes from nature. The only reason I'm throwing this out is that you see these thinkers over here with maybe more disciplined thinking, but there are all kinds of religious and cultic appropriations of this thought. Perhaps not as disciplined thinking in Bielfeldt as Plotinus, for instance. And of course, figures like Numenius seem to combine elements of both discipline and maybe less disciplined thinking. The goal of existence is to purify the lower soul from nature and fate. So this concludes what I want to say about Middle Platonism. We'll come right back. Hang on. And go to the next slide show, and you'll find Neoplatonism. And we'll get into material that maybe is a little bit more familiar. Thank you.